Hi, we're here today with Diahan Southard. Diahan, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background?
Well, it's actually interesting to be here at ISHI because most of the time for the last 18 years I've been attending genealogy conferences. And so all the conversations at lunch and everything you hear is about obituaries and death records, and that's all great and interesting. But it's been extremely exciting for me to sit and hear people actually talking about DNA at every table because my background is in microbiology. That's what my degree is in. And so I've been working in the genetic genealogy industry really since it's been an industry, but I don't get to talk the DNA side very often. So it's been a real pleasure to be among other scientists.
Oh, that's wonderful. We're really happy to have you here. So it's your first year at ISHI.
It is my first year at ISHI.
What do you think so far? I know we're just getting started, but...
You know, it's been, like I said, wonderful to talk science. It's also very obvious how passionate everyone is about their job and about the work that they're doing, and it's inspiring. It makes me want to figure out even more, how can I fit in, how can I help, how can my 20 years of experience in my industry overlap and influence what's going on in the industry today. In fact, so when I was in college, that's how I got into genetic genealogy. We were researching the DNA of ancient Egyptian mummies.
Okay,
so there was this burial ground in Cairo, Egypt, and it was not near any major city. And so everybody's like, who are these people? Where did they come from? And there was a multidisciplinary approach trying to figure out who they were. So we were the DNA side. Of course, this is back a long time ago when we could only do mitochondrial DNA testing, really. And what became of it was that we could do all the mitochondrial DNA typing on these people, and we could tell how they were related to each other maternally, but then how do you figure out who they are? How do you figure out who they are to the rest of the world? And we're like, wouldn't it be great if we had a database of all the mitochondrial DNA of all the people in the world, and then we could figure out who these people were? And that was really the inception idea of genetic genealogy and a database. So I was part of the Sorenson Molecular Genealogy Foundation, which was the very first genetic genealogy effort ever.
Okay.
And we set out with this huge goal that one day we would be able to take some DNA from someone and tell them who they were. And this was a pipe dream. This was something we were hoping could happen, and now it's happening every day.
That's remarkable. So tell us a little bit about your progression. How did it go from Sorenson to the work that you're doing today?
Right, so it's funny because I feel like my whole life has just been a series of obvious next steps in a way. I feel like, and maybe I'm bragging, I shouldn't brag. So many people work so hard to figure out, what should I do with my life?
It's great if you know, though. That's wonderful.
Well,
yeah.
I think for me it's just literally just been handed. It was just, this is the next thing at each step. But you can trace it all back to my high school English teacher.
Oh.
Thank you, Mr. Calvert.
We have to make sure he watches this.
Yes. He told all of us graduating seniors, and I tell every high school kid that I know this, that the most impact you can have on your future career when you go to college is to find a professor who's researching something you're interested in and get involved. Every professor has to research. So you've got to get your hands wet right at the beginning. And so I did. And that's how I ended up working on this project of these ancient Egyptian mummies in Egypt, which turned into the Sorenson Molecular Genealogy Foundation. I worked for the foundation and its sister company. It was called GeneTree at the time, which was the first commercial, actually Relative Genetics first, and then GeneTree, which were the first commercial efforts to offer DTC testing to the world, essentially. But then that was all bundled and sold to Ancestry. The Sorenson Foundation became the foundation of Ancestry's DNA database and their product that they have today. So at that juncture where that sale happened, Ancestry was offering positions to many of us, but at the time I had young kids and I really wasn't in a position to want to work full-time outside the home. I'd had this amazingly cush position with Sorenson, really doing as much work as I wanted, and in the office or outside the office, it didn't really matter. It was really flexible. And I didn't want to work full-time outside the home. And so I was kind of left what do I do now? And thankfully I had some really supportive colleagues, and the three of us started a company together, which didn't last very long. They got real jobs and had to move on. And so I ended up starting my own business, which is now Your DNA Guide.
Okay.
And I'm an educator. I teach people, anybody that wants to know how to use their DNA to find their family.
Well, let's talk more about that. Let's start at the beginning. I mean, how does your microbiology degree, how does your background, how did that all fit into the work that you're doing now?
Well, I think what makes me realize how impactful my microbiology degree has been is when I talk with other genetic genealogists. Most of the people that are in the industry have come from the genealogy side, and they spend a lot of years doing genealogy, and then DNA comes along and they're self-taught. They've learned amazingly, really, how to do all of this, where I came in the other way. And there's a difference, I feel like, just in simple things that you're taught in school, like the scientific method. There's a set of procedures that you follow, and when you get to the end is hardly ever an answer. It's always a hypothesis.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah.
It's always, this is what we think based on our current data, but there's always room for more data. And I think that's really helped me in my career to approach it that way, instead of, oh look, here's some information, this must be the answer, which is a common fault in genealogy research in general, but especially I think with genetic genealogy.
I think that's an excellent point, because it is still fairly new, and so all of those protocols and rules that will be applied maybe haven't matured yet.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So you'll be teaching a class on that, a workshop at the end of the conference. It sounds like it's hands-on. What will people be doing?
Right.
Yeah.
So I've evolved as a teacher, of course, over the last 18 years, and I've realized that it doesn't matter how long you sit in a classroom and you watch someone teach, and even if you're taking notes, you don't really get it until you're actually doing it. And also what I've found is when you go home to try to actually do it, you're by yourself. And there's no one to answer your questions.
Right. Where do I go now?
Yes,
Yeah.
like you thought you understood, and maybe you did, but when it comes to actually applying it, you're like, oh, I can't remember what she said. And so by putting that in the hands of each student in the class while I'm still there, it helps everybody to work through most of the basic steps that they'll need to use on their own later.
So you're really in an interesting field. How do you balance ethical questions, things like the right to privacy versus law enforcement's right to protect public safety?
This is huge.
It is a huge question,
like
but
4
yeah,
hours
right.
and not be done. It is a balance, like every other technology. And I've tried to think in my own mind, and a lot of my hesitation about entering law enforcement and this industry has been because I'm hung up on these questions, and I don't feel like I know the answers for myself with enough confidence that I want to jump in and move forward, which is why I haven't taken on any casework for law enforcement.
Okay.
I've stayed in the education business. I haven't gone there yet. Not that I won't ever, but again, I'm not certain exactly where I fall on all of the myriad of issues, especially the ethical issues. But I think today, with the announcement from the DOJ, goes a long way to let us see what's acceptable.
Mm-hmm.
I've also talked extensively with a lot of the California departments that have written out their own MOUs, which has been fantastic, and I think more departments need to sit down and say, this is what we will and won't allow.
They've been very progressive in that area.
That's what needs to happen, and I love it. It makes me excited. It makes me feel like, okay, I can be a part of this. I can be a part of a system. I can be a part of a plan. I can be a part of a well thought out process, because that's, again, maybe that's my scientific training. I want to know exactly what's allowed and what's not allowed, and I want those parameters to be set before I jump in and try, for a lot of reasons. But I think it has a lot to do with where we're comfortable spending our privacy, just like in every other aspect, like cell phone data, for example. I think that's very similar in that, we would all be a lot safer if all of our cell phone data was always available for law enforcement to look at. We could learn a lot and probably stop a lot of crime. And similarly, if everybody had their DNA tested, well, things would be a lot easier. But there's give and take, and I'm excited that I see a path, and that I think we can come to a really good arrangement and a really good balance between personal privacy and stopping the bad guy.
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, we have to answer that in every area of our lives, so it's not surprising in that way. Well, let's talk about maybe one of the cases you've been working on. Is there a case that you've solved that you're able to talk about at all, or an interesting challenge that you've faced in the work you've been doing the last 5 years?
So I work with a lot of different kinds of people. The bulk of my work is with people who are genealogists, and they want to use DNA to find their third great grandfather or whatever, which it can do, which is pretty amazing. But what I'm finding is more and more often, these people who are seeking one goal are learning through DNA about this entirely different set of family plans.
Okay.
For example, I was speaking just last month at the Crimes Against Children's Conference, and one of the people in my class came up to me after and was like, oh, my husband was just recently had his DNA test done, and we have this cousin we can't figure out, and would you look at it? And I said, sure, of course. Well, of course, when you have a really close cousin that you don't know, it means that there's a mystery in your family that has yet to be explored, and that happens more often than not. I'm talking with someone about a particular question, and I say, now who is this match? And they're like, I don't know who that is. And I'm like, well, they're coming up as close as a first cousin. Most people know all of their first cousins. So if you don't know this person, there's something that we need to investigate. And so more often than not, that's what's happening.
Okay.
I'm in the moment having to break news to people that their family situation is not what they thought. And that's been delicate and interesting. And the range of emotions that comes with that for me and for the person I'm telling is really, is different in every case.
How have you handled that, or what advice would you give to somebody who's thinking about this field and preparing for that?
Yeah, I think number one, and it sounds trite almost, but I tell people all the time, just stick with the golden rule. You can only do for other people what you would want done for yourself. And without there can't be any rules about who you should tell or when you should tell them or if you should tell them. It's a case-by-case, person-by-person basis. And so if we're going to issue one rule that helps govern, that's it. You can only do what you would want done for you. Number one, I feel like people want to tell someone, or they need to tell someone, they need to have a confidant. And so it's nice to be that person who's so removed. I don't know any of them. And so it's nice to be able to talk, and I think that helps people just to talk with someone. And then I always encourage them, you need to go to the source. So if your parent who perhaps had this other child is still alive, go to them. Don't talk to your siblings first. Certainly don't talk to the other parent first. Give your parent or that person who's closest to the issue a chance to explain themselves and a chance to make things right themselves before you go and talk to other people.
That's good advice, because it is a delicate situation, and I'm sure it does happen quite a bit.
It does.
Yeah. So how have you liked being an entrepreneur? What's that been? I mean, that's brand new.
I've kind of hated it.
Oh,
I know, it's funny, right?
Yeah.
I feel like all those successful entrepreneurs that you hear from are like, oh, I had lemonade stands when I was 5, and yeah, no, not me.
It's much more work than people tell you.
Well, it is, and there's just so much uncertainty.
Yes.
And in all honesty, I couldn't do it without my husband. He's so supportive, and he's my best cheerleader.
Aww.
And he has a great job. Which means if I fail at this, we will still have food, we will still have a house, and the kids can still play soccer. So it's such a huge blessing. Because a lot of people ask me, oh, how can I get into the industry? I was like, marry an awesome person. Like, that's my number one piece of advice. Because it's really hard.
Yes, yeah.
And there's so many decisions that have to be made. And I don't love making decisions. Like, I kind of would love somebody just to swoop in and be like, just do this. And I'd be like, sweet, I'm in. But that's not the way it works.
No.
So you have to make a lot of decisions. And But I've had a couple of opportunities recently to give up my entrepreneurial life and work for a real companies that I believed in and I really like. And I thought as soon as that day came along that I would just jump ship and be part of the workforce again, and it didn't.
Okay, so
maybe it's growing on me.
It might be. Besides the insecurity, there are a lot of pluses.
There's so many pluses. Like, I don't think I could give it up now, honestly,
Yeah.
and go back to a real job. There's just so much flexibility, and I can make all the decisions, which means I do get to do whatever I want. And I can say, you know what? I'm not comfortable with this right now. I'm gonna not do that. Instead of a boss saying, you know what? This is what we're doing. You're getting in.
Right.
And I would have hated that.
Yeah.
So I think I said that I hated it, but I think I might actually love it.
Okay.
Isn't that how things are? You
It's
either love
true.
them or you hate them, or maybe it's both.
And the biggest challenges turn into the biggest opportunities, and you get past that. It's interesting how that works.
Yeah, it is.
Well, what's next for you?
I have this really great idea for a really great product that I think will change the way people do things. Because right now, there's a lot of really great books out there about genetic genealogy and even about forensic genealogy. But just like sitting there and watching a lecture, you can only take so much from what's written about other cases or about methodology, because every case is different, and you're going to come to that juncture where you're like, this isn't in the book, you know? And I feel like there's a way to address that in a more direct way, to just make a product like probably like a video course or something that allows you to just be more customized, because while there isn't one path to an answer, there aren't an infinite number of paths either. And so I feel like with all the experience I've had and all the people I've talked to and all the people I've helped, I feel like I've identified probably at least 80% of the paths that can be taken, and I can identify them. And so I feel like I can help people not just understand how it's done, but to take their own case, be it law enforcement or a genealogist who wants to find their second great grandfather.
Right.
You start here, I can teach you how to get there. So I'm excited. I've worked on it. I've started work on it.
Oh, that's exciting.
And so that's next for sure. Also is I really want to create a program of education for children.
That's a great idea.
I feel like a lot of the talk, especially recently with mass school shootings, especially the one in Florida hit very close to home for us, have made me think, how can we prevent this really, like at its core? And I know there's all sorts of political jargon going on around these issues, but for me, I'm like, if each child at, say, 9 years old understands two things: who am I genetically, like how does my DNA reflect who I am, what can my DNA tell me about me, and who's my family? Who are my parents? Who are my grandparents? Where did they come from? What are their stories? Those two things, it's shown, like research has shown, if kids know this about themselves, they are more likely to be engaged with their family, more likely to be engaged with their peers, more likely to be engaged in society. And that means they're less likely to commit crime. And I really believe in this idea that if we could get, again, a fun, hands-on, interactive, innovative program to children, that we could literally change the way they see themselves and their connection to the people around them.
They are so open and interested,
Yes.
so it's a great time to
It is.
start. Yeah, that sounds wonderful.
Thanks.
Anything else about your work we haven't covered that you really want this audience to know about?
I think number one is this works. Genetic genealogy, it works. And it works in genealogy, and it works in law enforcement at times when nothing else does. And that makes it uniquely powerful. And with any tool that is uniquely powerful, there comes great responsibility.
Yes.
And I think we can't, I guess, lose the awe of that, or lose the impact of that. And we're so at the beginning, we have no idea where this is really going and how much this will really impact our societies. So we have to be careful about how fast we move ahead so that we're not running in the wrong direction.
Those powerful words, and I don't think you could have said it better. I mean, I think there's a lot of talk about that at this symposium, and it will just continue.
I agree.
Yeah. Thank you, Diane. We really appreciate you coming in. I hope you come back.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks.